Oh, good morning. Yeah, it's me, John, the world's greatest daddy, coming at you live from my kitchen. Yesterday was Grandpa's birthday. Louise made that. Henry made another one. Things are coming together around here. October 26th, 1804. Tomorrow morning I will walk ahead to the Mandan village and make certain of our welcome. I spent a good portion of the morning looking over my animal collection, in particular the prairie wolf captain Clark managed to kill a few weeks ago. The animal is quite different from the larger gray wolf and is definitely a different species, but certainly a canine of some type. It was a female. Remember this? They went out and killed the one that Seaman actually was, I think, maybe falling in love with. Such a cool perspective. It was my little beauty, whom I had not seen since the captains had fired upon her and missed. I knew she was still following us, but she seemed to have grown cautious again after her brush with the captains. I had hoped that the experience would prevent her from showing herself again. It didn't. Captain Clark shot her while I was on a ramble with Captain Lewis. When we got back to camp, we found her stiffened body lying on the keelboat deck, her golden eyes dulled by death. I could not watch as the captain measured her and stripped her fur away. Coulter yawns. How much more is there? Joulard asks. A good bit more, Coulter says, flipping through the pages. Joulard looks at Mountain Dog and Wakui. Coulter's eyes are getting sore. We'll continue reading tomorrow. Wakui takes the red book, slips it back into the otter skin pouch, and hands it to Mountain Dog. We will return tomorrow night, she says. Coulter and Joulard watch them walk away and spread their blankets on the ground. So where the devil do you think they got that book? Coulter asks. Guess we'll find out after you finish reading it, Joulard says. Within a few minutes, both men are asleep. So remember, those are the characters from way back in the beginning. They find the book. There's a map, by the way. But they find this book in a mysterious red pouch. Remember, John Coulter gallops into camp, jumps off his horse, and shouts, Seaman, good Lord, is that really you? We thought you were dead. Sounds like the whole thing is going to come together in the end. October 9th, 1804. We are now in the Mandans, trying to find a good spot to build our winter fort. There was a prairie fire this morning in which several Mandans were burned to death while they were out hunting buffalo. When the inferno died down, I followed Joulard and Tabot out onto the scorched flatland to view the devastation. We found the charred remains of buffalo, wolves, foxes, rabbits, and humans. Gray Squirrel and his wife running water, Tabot said, looking down at two bodies. Grass fires moved just as fast as the wind. They didn't have a chance. Caw, caw! Whitefeather landed on a burnt buffalo skin, not far from the bodies. It had been a long time since I had seen him, and I figured he'd stop following us. I was happy that he was back. Caw, caw, caw! Joulard and Tabot continued their conversation, and did not give the crow a single glance. I walked over to the buffalo skin, and Whitefeather flew away. Something moved beneath the skin, and I started digging. There was a cry to go along with the movement, which quickly turned into a loud wailing. Joulard pushed me aside, and Tabot flipped the skin over. It was a child making the noise. I'll be, Tabot said. Gray Squirrel's son. When the fire came, they must have rolled him up in the wet skin. There isn't a single blister on him. Why didn't they crawl into the skin themselves? Not big enough. Joulard picked the boy up and carried him back to the Mandan village. November 3rd, 1804. We've started building our fort. It is located across from the first Mandan village. There were two Mandan villages, one on the east side of the Missouri and one on the west side. A little farther north, there were three Hidatsa villages situated on the smaller Knife River. The Mandans lived in large earth lodges about 40 feet around. In each village there were 40 lodges, with at least 10 people living in each lodge. At night, they brought their horses and dogs right into the lodge to sleep alongside them. The men built our fort across from the first Mandan village. The gated wall surrounding the fort was made out of stout trees, and it stood 18 feet tall. The captains had the swivel gun put on top of the wall in case we were attacked. Inside were 2 rows of small huts for the men to sleep in, a foundry, and a plaza to hold council with the Indians, of whom there was a steady flow. The Mandan and Hidatsa villages functioned like the wharves I'd grown up on. but instead of using money, transactions were based purely on trade. Each lodge was a store filled with goods. Cheyenne, Arikara, Sioux, Ottos, French, and English from Canada, Spaniards, and men and women from half a dozen other tribes traveled across the prairie sea to trade their wares here. A good horse might cost 3 tanned buffalo robes, 100 blue beads, and 20 pounds of corn. The Indian who traded the horse would take what he got and trade it for something he and his family really needed. The Mandans were experienced traders. When we first arrived, they offered us a few gifts of meat and corn, but after that it was all business. Dozens of Mandans showed up at the fort every day with bushels of corn, and squash, meat, buffalo robes, furs, and other items. The men would sit down with them in the plaza, and the long process of haggling over prices would begin. It wasn't long before the cold descended and held us in its icy fist. The river froze solid, and our men walked around with buffalo robes wrapped around themselves, the hair sides against their bodies. The Mandans didn't seem to be bothered by the cold. They wore thin moccasins and often spent the night out on the windswept prairie without even a fire or robe to keep them warm. Because of my fur, I was also not particularly bothered by the cold. In fact, I preferred the cold to the heat of summer. When the men were off duty, they huddled around the fires in their huts, trying to keep the chill away, or walked over to the Mandan villages to visit. The captains spent most of their time inside the fort. Captain Lewis worked on his notes for President Jefferson, and Captain Clark refined the maps of where we had been. Don't forget that one of the big jobs that they had was drawing maps of all of this territory that they were going through. And some of Captain Clark's maps, when you compare them to like a Google map that's from a real satellite and it's an actual photo, are crazy accurate. That'll be a fun thing for us to do online together. I will make a note of that. One day, a Frenchman named Toussaint Charbonneau showed up at the fort and walked in on Captain Lewis unannounced, catching him in the middle of working on his animal collection. Charbonneau did not know better than to disturb the captain when he was working. "My name is Toussaint Charbonneau," he said with a heavy accent. "I would like to be your interpreter." Captain Lewis looked up and glared at the intruder for a full minute without uttering a single word. Charbonneau had a bushy, unkempt beard, shoulder-length gray hair, and a unique smell to him that I placed somewhere between a buffalo and a raccoon smell. He took his hat off. The top of his head was as bald as a newborn mouse pup. While the captain continued his silent stare, Charbonneau looked around the hut casually, without the slightest idea that his host was irritated. "We already have an interpreter," Captain Lewis said finally, and he continued down working on the skull he'd been examining. "Do you mean Drouillard?" Captain Lewis looked up again, as if he were surprised that Charbonneau was still standing there. "That's exactly who I mean." "Ha!" Charbonneau slapped his chubby belly. Captain Lewis flushed in anger. He didn't like this loud Frenchman, and he was about to throw him out of the hut when Captain Clark walked in. Captain Lewis took a deep breath to calm himself. "We have a visitor," he said. "This is Toussaint Charbonneau." I've heard that name," Captain Clark said, putting his hand out. "You live with the Hidatsas?" "Yes, I do." "He wants to be our interpreter," Captain Lewis said. "But we haven't—" "I already told Mr. Charbonneau that George Drouillard is our interpreter. He was not impressed." Perhaps I should start again," Charbonneau offered, finally seeing they were annoyed. "By all means," Captain Lewis said. "I didn't mean any offense. I'm sure your man Drouillard is a good man. But does he speak fluent Shoshone?" The captains looked at each other in surprise, not sure they understood. None of us had ever seen a Shoshone Indian, but the captains were depending on the Shoshone tribe to sell us horses when we reached the mountains next summer. Making peace with the Shoshones and trading for their horses would be critical to the success of the expedition. The captains had been talking about the problem just that morning over breakfast. "And I suppose you speak fluent Shoshone?" Captain Lewis asked. Charbonneau launched into an involved answer, but Captain Lewis didn't understand what he was saying. "Tabot!" he called. Tabot stuck his head into the hut. "Can you find out if this man actually speaks the Shoshone language?" Charbonneau and Tabot spoke in French for several minutes. "He does not speak Shoshone," Tabot explained. "But he has 2 Shoshone wives living with him up at the Hidatsa village. The women were captured in a Hidatsa raid a few years ago, and Charbonneau here won them in a bet with the warriors who owned them. He says he'll bring them with him. He also says he's a skilled boatman. I wonder who one of those wives might be. The captains asked Tabot to take Charbonneau outside. "What do you think?" Captain Lewis asked. "We need someone who can speak Shoshone. I don't suppose he'll allow one of his wives to come along without him. Probably not. And even if he were willing, having a woman along could pose a problem." Captain Clark nodded in agreement. "We could use another boatman." "True." The captains talked for quite some time before calling Charbonneau back in. After another long discussion, they reached an agreement with him. Charbonneau would be hired, and he would bring one of his wives with him. The following week, he brought 2 wives to the fort. They were just girls, no more than 15 or 16 years old. When they were introduced to the captains, they stared down at the ground shyly. Charbonneau had chosen the girl named Sacagawea to accompany us in the spring. In the Hidatsa language, he said, Sacagawea means bird woman. The name fit her well. She was a small-boned girl with long, crow-colored hair, pulled back and braided in the Indian way. I walked up to her, and she immediately scratched my ears. As I stood there enjoying her attention, I could pick up an odd scent from her that could mean only one thing. Bird woman was carrying a pup inside her. "We know who that is. That's Jean-Baptiste." The captains were clearly unaware of this, and I suspected Charbonneau was no less ignorant. They would all find out soon enough. When they left, Captain Lewis said, "I hope Sacagawea is strong enough to endure the rigors of our journey. Bird woman would surprise us all." Look what the author did. They gave that one sentence its own paragraph. I think she probably deserves that paragraph, huh? All right, that is all I have for today. But the next installment will be January 12th, 1805.